The room fell eerily silent as Sterling Thorne sat motionless in his wheelchair, surrounded by high-powered businessmen. The weight of his father's expectations pressed down on him, and the tension was palpable. But everything changed the moment the door swung open. A 5-year-old girl, dressed in ragged clothes, her face streaked with dirt, walked in with an air of unexplainable confidence. All eyes turned toward her, and the air seemed to hold its breath. "Sign the deal and I'll heal you," she said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence, aimed directly at Sterling. Sterling Thorne, the paralyzed son of CEO Maxwell Thorne, was expected to play a pivotal role in a major business deal, but his paralysis had kept him from fully participating. Maxwell, a man who controlled a tech empire, was consumed by finding a cure for his son's condition, but had seen all his efforts fail. Jasmine, the homeless girl, appeared out of nowhere. No one understood who she was or how she could know anything about the deal at hand. The room erupted in laughter, with people snickering and shaking their heads. To them, this was just a confused child, nothing more than an annoyance. But Sterling, despite himself, felt a strange pull, a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in years. Maxwell, ever the skeptic, decided to humor her. "Prove it," he said, watching her carefully. Jasmine didn't flinch. She had already made her promise. The room may have doubted her, but something in Sterling's heart was stirred. Could this young girl, standing boldly before him, truly be the answer to the miracle he had longed for? "Stay with me as I take you through the unbelievable journey that followed." In the meantime, how did you think Jasmine's audacious promise shook the foundations of everyone's beliefs? Comment your thoughts below, like this video, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Your support helps us bring more intriguing stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. Before that fateful meeting, Sterling was living a life confined not just by his body, but by his father's relentless expectations. Let me take you back to how Sterling's life and Jasmine's incredible gift collided. Sterling's world was one of constant pressure, both physical and emotional. He had never known what it was like to move freely, to stand tall, or even walk without assistance. Ever since he could remember, his life had been limited to a wheelchair, surrounded by machines and constant medical treatments. The world outside, full of movement and vibrancy, was something he could only experience from a distance, never fully a part of it. Every day was a reminder of the cruel twist of fate that had left him dependent, locked inside his own body. Sterling's father, Maxwell Thorne, had built an empire from the ground up, creating a tech company worth billions. But no amount of money or resources could buy his son a cure. For years, Maxwell had tried everything: experimental treatments, cutting-edge therapies, the most prestigious specialists from across the world. But nothing worked. The doctors always delivered the same verdict: there's no hope for him. This is his life now. Maxwell's relentless pursuit of a solution had only made Sterling feel more like a burden. Every business deal, every successful acquisition, every breakthrough in the company was tied back to his father's one obsession: fixing his son. There was no separation between Sterling's life and his father's business empire. If Maxwell succeeded, it was because he had to keep pushing forward, keep making money, keep finding a cure. But if Maxwell failed, it wasn't just the company that suffered. It was Sterling, the son he had never quite been able to help. Sterling sat at the boardroom table, the harsh lights overhead making the room feel suffocating. His wheelchair was positioned near the edge, close to his father's place at the head of the table. The room was filled with the usual buzz of important conversations, but Sterling hardly paid attention. The voices around him blended into a dull hum. He had stopped listening to most of it. His mind was elsewhere, on the weight of his father's expectations, the pressure of being the heir to an empire, and the crushing reality that he would never be able to live up to them. "Sterling, we need you to speak up. This deal will decide the future of the company." His father's voice broke through his thoughts. Maxwell's gaze was sharp, his tone a command, and more than a request. But Sterling wasn't sure if he had it in him anymore. The energy to lead, to speak, to be the face of the company. It felt like everything he had been for the past few years was just an illusion, a carefully crafted image that the world and his father depended on. The truth was, Sterling had no real control over his own future. He was trapped, and even though he had been told his entire life that miracles could happen, a part of him had long since stopped believing. As the meeting progressed, Sterling's eyes glazed over, the words around him fading into the background. He glanced down at his hands, still numb, still useless. The business talk went on, but it all felt like noise. He could hear the murmurs about investments, acquisitions, and expansion, but it didn't matter. None of it mattered when your body failed you at every turn. Then, just as his mind began to drift completely, the doors to the boardroom swung open with a force that sent a wave of silence through the room. Sterling's attention snapped toward the entrance, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. A small figure stood in the doorway. A girl, no older than 5, with messy, tangled hair and dirt streaked across her face. She was dressed in clothes that looked too big for her small frame, the fabric worn and ragged. For a moment, no one in the room knew what to do. She didn't belong here. This was a room of high-powered executives, a room where only the elite walked. Yet there she stood, looking completely out of place. Sterling watched her with growing curiosity, unable to look away. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite place. Jasmine's eyes, however, were focused entirely on him. Without a word, she walked toward him, her small shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. The boardroom was silent, everyone unsure of what to make of this sudden interruption. They all stared, waiting for someone to speak, to make sense of the situation. But Jasmine didn't wait. She stopped right in front of Sterling's wheelchair, meeting his gaze with an intensity that caught him off guard. She didn't flinch. She didn't seem afraid. Instead, she looked at him with something far more powerful, something Sterling hadn't seen in years: confidence. "Sign the deal, and I'll heal you," she said, her voice piercing through the silence. The room erupted in laughter. Maxwell's eyes widened in disbelief, his hand clenching the armrests of his chair as he looked from Jasmine to his son. The other executives were already snickering, exchanging amused glances. How could anyone take a homeless child seriously? She had no idea what she was talking about. She didn't even know what this meeting was about, let alone the significance of the deal at hand. But Sterling felt something shift inside him. He wasn't sure why, but in that moment, a spark of something long forgotten flickered to life inside him. Hope. It was as if Jasmine had struck some hidden chord in him, the kind of chord that he had buried deep beneath years of disappointment and resignation. Could she really heal him? Was it possible? His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He had spent years being told that there was no cure, that he would never walk again. Yet here, in front of him, was this little girl who spoke with such certainty, with such power, that Sterling could not dismiss it entirely. Maxwell, still processing what had just happened, stared at the girl with a look of disbelief. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice edged with curiosity, but also skepticism. Jasmine stood tall in front of Sterling, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm Jasmine," she said simply, as if her name was enough. "And I can help you." For a long moment, the room was dead silent. Everyone was waiting for someone to speak, to break the tension. But nothing could be said. Jasmine's words had already done their work, planted a seed of doubt, of hope, of possibility. Maxwell turned to his colleagues, his voice stern as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Get her out of here," he ordered, waving a hand toward the door. But Jasmine didn't move. She stood her ground, her small frame unwavering. "I can help him," she repeated, this time her voice softer, but still confident. "If you sign the deal, I'll heal him. But you have to believe. You have to trust me." The room was still. The executives looked at each other, unsure of what to make of this bizarre moment. Some shook their heads, still unsure of what was happening. Sterling, however, found himself looking at her again. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, a flicker of belief, something he had pushed down for so long. Maxwell watched his son carefully. The look in Sterling's eyes was different, unsure, but hopeful. Maxwell, still unsure of what to make of the child's words, leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the armrest. He had no idea who this girl was or how she had come to be here, but one thing was certain: Sterling was affected. "Fine," Maxwell said finally, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "Prove it." Jasmine didn't hesitate. She smiled softly, and in that moment, it was as though she knew something the rest of them didn't. And so, the first step of the unbelievable journey began, one that would challenge everything Sterling thought he knew about his condition, his father, and the power of belief. The days that followed were nothing short of strange. At first, Sterling and the others around him tried to brush off the incident with Jasmine as nothing more than a bizarre moment, a brief interruption in an otherwise tense business meeting. Yet, Sterling couldn't shake the strange feeling that lingered in the pit of his stomach. He had gone through his entire life believing that no one could ever heal him. His paralysis wasn't just a physical barrier. It was the constant reminder that his body had betrayed him, that his future would never be what he had hoped. Every attempt at healing had failed. Every new medical advancement was met with the same bitter disappointment. He was stuck in a body that refused to cooperate, stuck in a life his father had carefully scripted for him. But now, here was Jasmine, a 5-year-old girl, homeless, ragged, and out of place, offering him something that seemed impossible: healing. She had looked him in the eye and spoken with such unwavering certainty, as if her promise wasn't a mere whim, but a truth she knew deep within her. It wasn't just her words that had shaken him, but her actions in the days that followed. It started the very next morning. Maxwell had arranged for Jasmine to be taken to the company's offices to meet with him, hoping to get to the bottom of this strange encounter. Despite his skepticism, there was something in Sterling's eyes that Maxwell couldn't ignore. His son, typically resigned to his fate, had seemed hopeful. And so, Maxwell had decided to give Jasmine a chance, though he wasn't sure what kind of chance he was giving her. Jasmine arrived at the office, her small feet carrying her confidently through the polished marble floors of the corporate headquarters. She looked entirely out of place in the sea of sharp suits and polished shoes, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were fixed on Sterling from the moment she walked into the room, and her gaze didn't waver as she approached him. "Good morning, Sterling," she said, as if they were old friends, as if they'd known each other for years. Sterling blinked, taken aback by her familiarity. "Good morning," he managed, though he wasn't entirely sure how to react. Maxwell, who had been observing the exchange closely, cleared his throat. "Jasmine, do you have something to say to my son?" he asked, trying to sound businesslike, though his tone was still laced with curiosity. Jasmine turned her gaze to Maxwell, meeting his eyes with a calmness that was both unsettling and intriguing. "I know you're worried about the deal," she said, her voice steady, "but Sterling needs more than a business deal. He needs to believe in something greater." Maxwell furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" Jasmine didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned her attention back to Sterling, who was watching her closely, his curiosity piqued. She took a few steps toward him, her small hands clasped in front of her, and then spoke with the same quiet confidence she had in the boardroom. "You've been waiting for a miracle, Sterling," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But miracles don't happen when you stop believing they can. I know you're tired of waiting. I know you've stopped hoping. But you have to trust me. You have to believe, and then you'll see the miracle happen." Sterling's mind raced. How could she know this? How could she know the depths of his doubts, his fears, the loneliness that had followed him for years? No one had ever understood him like this before, not even his father. "You're saying you can heal me?" Sterling asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine nodded, her eyes filled with an unwavering certainty. "Yes, but it's not just about healing your body. It's about healing your heart, your soul. You've been carrying this weight for too long. You need to let go of the fear, the doubt, the belief that you're broken. Only then will the healing begin. For the next few days, Jasmine's presence in the office was a constant. She seemed to be everywhere, interacting with employees, offering words of encouragement to those who seemed lost, and, most importantly, speaking to Sterling. She often sat with him during the long, drawn-out meetings, offering him quiet words of support when the pressure of his father's expectations grew too heavy. Jasmine's insight into people was uncanny. She spoke with such certainty about the things she couldn't possibly know. She knew about the late-night conversation Sterling had overheard between his father and the doctors, where they discussed his condition in hushed tones, as if he wasn't even there. She knew about the moments when Sterling had sat alone in his room, his mind spiraling into despair, wondering if he would ever walk again. But it wasn't just about Sterling. Jasmine had an unsettling way of understanding everyone around her. She spoke to Maxwell one morning as he was pacing the halls, consumed by yet another deal that was slipping through his fingers. "You're afraid, aren't you?" she had asked him quietly, her voice soft yet piercing. Maxwell stopped in his tracks, startled by the question. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of losing control," she said, her eyes fixed on his. "You're so used to being in charge, so used to fixing everything, that you're scared of what will happen when you can't fix it. But you can't control everything, Maxwell. Sometimes you have to let go." Maxwell stood frozen for a moment, taken aback by her words. It was true, what she said. He had always been the one to control everything: the company, his son's future, his own destiny. But for the first time, he realized how out of control he truly felt. While Maxwell wrestled with his own demons, Sterling found himself becoming more and more affected by Jasmine's presence. At first, he had dismissed her words, brushing them off as the ramblings of a child. But the more he saw her, the more he found himself questioning everything he had believed about himself and his condition. Could he really be healed? Was it possible that this girl, this homeless, ragged child, could offer him the one thing he had stopped believing in: hope? Sterling's skepticism gnawed at him constantly. How could someone so young understand the complexities of his life? How could she possibly know the depth of his despair, the weight of his father's expectations, the bitterness that had taken root in his soul? Yet, there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when Sterling felt something stir inside him. When Jasmine spoke to him, it wasn't like the usual platitudes he had heard from doctors, therapists, or even his father. She didn't tell him what to do or how to think. She simply listened and spoke with such a quiet confidence that it made him wonder, what if she was right? What if he had been holding himself back, refusing to believe in the possibility of change? The conflict inside him grew stronger each day. His skepticism fought against his longing for something more, a way out of the cage of his own doubts and fears. And every time Jasmine spoke, the walls he had built around his heart seemed to crumble just a little more. But there was one thing that Sterling couldn't shake: his father's expectations. Maxwell had always treated him like an extension of his company. If Sterling couldn't lead, couldn't contribute to the company's success, then what was he worth? Every time Maxwell looked at him, There was a hint of disappointment in his eyes, a silent reminder that Sterling's paralysis wasn't just a physical limitation, it was a failure in his father's eyes. "Sterling," Maxwell's voice broke through his thoughts one afternoon as they sat together in the office. "This deal is everything. We can't afford to fail. You need to be part of this. You need to show them that you're capable." Sterling swallowed hard, the weight of his father's words pressing down on him. He looked at Maxwell, trying to muster the courage to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he ever be a part of something so big when he couldn't even move on his own? "I'm doing my best, Dad," Sterling said, his voice tight with emotion. "But you have to understand. I can't do it. I'm not what you want me to be." Maxwell's expression softened for a moment, and Sterling could see the strain in his father's eyes. "I don't want you to be anything you're not, son. But I need you to believe in yourself." Sterling felt a lump form in his throat. He had tried for so long to meet his father's expectations, but it was never enough. Maybe Jasmine was right. Maybe it was time to let go. As the days wore on, Sterling's internal turmoil deepened. He wasn't sure if he could fully trust Jasmine's promise, but something inside him told him that he had to try. For the first time in years, he felt the faintest spark of hope flicker to life inside him, a hope that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as broken as he had once thought. Jasmine's quiet wisdom had already begun to work its magic. Sterling was beginning to see the world through a different lens, one that wasn't clouded by doubt and fear. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to believe that something more was possible. And that belief, small, fragile, and uncertain, was all he needed to take the next step. Despite the faint flicker of hope that Jasmine had ignited in him, Sterling still found himself in the same unyielding position. His body, confined to a wheelchair, felt like a prison from which he couldn't escape. The physical strain of his condition weighed heavily on him, and the emotional toll of always falling short of his father's expectations only compounded the suffocating pressure. But there was something different now, something he couldn't quite explain. Every day, as Jasmine spoke to him, as she seemed to understand things about him that no one else did, a small part of him began to wonder if this might actually be possible. However, the outside world was a different matter, especially the world of his father, Maxwell Thorne. Maxwell had always been a man of logic and business. Everything in his life, from his empire to his son, was viewed through the lens of strategy and control. His every move was calculated, his every decision a product of careful deliberation. The fact that he was now considering a homeless 5-year-old girl's offer, an offer to heal his son, was completely absurd. But even as he dismissed the idea internally, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope stirring within him. Jasmine's words were compelling, and her insight into Sterling's life, while unsettling, couldn't be ignored. Maxwell spent the following days trying to rationalize the situation. He was a man who prided himself on making decisions based on facts, on what was tangible and provable. But Jasmine's gift, or what she claimed was her gift, was neither tangible nor provable. It was nothing more than an unsubstantiated claim from a child who didn't belong in their world. Still, he couldn't shake the thought. What if? Despite his growing curiosity, Maxwell remained deeply skeptical. He was unwilling to fully embrace the idea that a miracle could happen, especially not one that came in the form of a girl whose existence seemed to defy logic. But the pressure of the failing business and his son's ever-deteriorating condition pushed him into a corner. He had already invested so much into finding a cure for Sterling. This was just another in a long line of failed attempts. But something in him couldn't ignore Jasmine's presence. Maxwell knew he had to act, but he was torn. The company deal, the one that could save everything, was on the verge of falling apart. His business was teetering on the edge, and the pressure on him to close the deal was mounting. Sterling's paralysis wasn't just a personal issue for the family, it was a business issue. Maxwell had often used his son as a pawn in the corporate game, hoping that one day his son's success, or lack thereof, would prove the legitimacy of his empire. But with the business in jeopardy and no sign of a breakthrough for Sterling, Maxwell began to see this as a moment of desperation. He had to get the deal done. But could he do it without Sterling? The next morning, Maxwell found himself at a crossroads. The weight of his decisions, the looming deadlines, and the ever-present reminder of his son's condition had him at his limit. He had spent years fighting for a solution to Sterling's paralysis, pouring endless resources into the pursuit of something that had seemed increasingly impossible. Yet here was Jasmine, with no training, no credentials, and no explanation, offering something that seemed equally impossible, a promise of healing. Maxwell sat alone in his office, the blinds drawn against the sunlight. The room was dim, the hum of the city below drowned out by the tension in the air. He stared at the paperwork on his desk, his fingers drumming the surface in thought. "Sterling," he muttered under his breath, "what are we going to do?" Sterling sat in his wheelchair, alone in his room, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The familiar aches in his limbs were constant, as they always had been, a dull reminder of the life he would never live. The mirror in front of him reflected a face that was too young to feel this old, but the emotional toll of a lifetime spent in a body that betrayed him made him feel centuries older. The last few days had been a whirlwind of confusion, hope, and doubt. Jasmine had promised him a miracle, but the more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. Could he really believe in something like that? Could she really heal him? Could anyone? And what would that even mean? A cure? A new life? The promise sounded so simple when Jasmine said it, but the weight of it was enormous. Sterling wasn't sure he could live up to that kind of hope. What if it didn't work? What if he was just setting himself up for another disappointment, another failure? He thought of his father, the one person whose approval he desperately sought. Maxwell had poured every ounce of his energy into trying to find a cure for him, but it was never enough. There was always something missing, always something that made Sterling feel like he was standing on the sidelines, watching as his father moved forward with his empire, while Sterling stayed trapped in his wheelchair. Maxwell was proud of his success, but not of his son's condition. And that Sterling realized was the real weight he had been carrying all these years. The pressure to be more than he was. The pressure to live up to an ideal of strength and power that he would never achieve. He felt like a constant disappointment, a burden. Even now, as his father worked tirelessly to save the business, Sterling couldn't escape the feeling that he was somehow failing him. But what if Jasmine could help? What if, for once, he could have a chance to prove to his father, to himself, that he wasn't as helpless as everyone believed? Sterling closed his eyes, taking a slow, steady breath. Maybe it was time to take a leap of faith, something he had never done before. Maybe it was time to believe in something bigger than himself. The days passed, and the pressure continued to mount. Sterling's physical pain was constant, but it was the emotional toll of his father's expectations that cut deeper. The looming business deal felt like a ticking time bomb, and every moment that passed without progress seemed to bring Maxwell closer to a breaking point. One afternoon, Sterling was in his father's office, trying to keep up with the whirlwind of conversations surrounding the deal. His father was pacing back and forth, eyes glued to the phone as he barked instructions to his team. "We have one shot at this, Sterling," Maxwell said, his voice tight with frustration. "If we don't seal this deal, it's over." This is the make-or-break moment for the company. Sterling felt the familiar knot form in his stomach. His father's words were always heavy with expectation, but this time they felt different. There was an edge of desperation in his tone. Maxwell was consumed with the idea of saving the business, but Sterling couldn't help but wonder, what about him? What about his future? "I know, Dad," Sterling said quietly. "But what about me? What about my future?" Maxwell stopped pacing and turned to face him. His eyes softened, but the weariness in them was unmistakable. "Your future is tied to this company, Sterling. Everything we've worked for is on the line. If we don't get this deal done, everything we've built will fall apart." Sterling's heart sank. His father's words stung. "So that's all I am to you?" he asked, a tinge of bitterness in his voice. "A tool to help you fix your empire?" Maxwell's eyes flashed with anger, but there was also something else. Something like regret. "No," he said slowly, "but this business is the only thing that can give us both a future. I'm doing this for you, Sterling. I'm doing everything I can to find a way to help you, to fix what's wrong." Sterling felt the weight of his father's words, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was always more pressure to prove himself. He wanted to scream, to tell his father that he was more than a company asset, that he wasn't just the son of a CEO, but a person in his own right. But instead, he sat there silently, his emotions bubbling under the surface. The next few days were a blur of meetings and tense conversations. Sterling's body ached, and his mind swirled with doubt, but in the quiet moments, when he was alone, he couldn't help but think about Jasmine's words, the promise she had made. Could she really heal him? Could she be the one thing that could finally break him free from the prison he had built around himself? It was a question Sterling was still wrestling with. But as the pressure of the business deal grew heavier, he found himself wondering more and more, What if he didn't have to do this alone? What if, just this once, he could trust in someone else? Jasmine had made him believe that it was possible. Maybe, just maybe, he could take that first step and let the miracle happen. Sterling sat alone in his room that evening, his wheelchair facing the window, where the city lights shimmered faintly in the distance. The world outside seemed so alive, so full of movement and possibility. And yet, here he was, still trapped, unable to move freely. His mind was clouded, torn between doubt and a fragile sliver of hope that Jasmine had sparked in him. She had made a promise, one that seemed far too impossible to believe. But there was something about her presence that had shaken him to his core, something in the way she spoke, the way she looked at him, that made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, this time, the impossible could become possible. The weight of the business deal loomed over him. Maxwell's relentless pressure continued to build, and Sterling knew that the stakes had never been higher. The deal was on the edge of collapse, and with it, his father's hopes for both their futures. The clock was ticking, and every second felt like it was slipping away. But Sterling was torn. He had spent his entire life fighting against the limits of his body, fighting to prove to his father, to the world, that he was more than his paralysis. And now Jasmine's words echoed in his mind. "You have to believe, Sterling. Only then will the miracle happen." But belief was hard. It was something he had lost years ago, buried deep inside after countless failed attempts to heal, to fix what had been broken. The scars on his body were a constant reminder of that failure. How could he believe in something so simple, something so far out of reach, when his reality had always been so harsh? The more Sterling thought about it, the more his doubts crept in. How could he trust a homeless little girl, someone with no formal training or explanation, to heal him? What made her different from the countless doctors, specialists, and treatments that had failed him over the years? He had given so much to the idea of healing, only to be left disappointed again and again. Could he really let himself believe this time? In the quiet of his room, with the weight of the world pressing down on him, Sterling made a decision. He would meet with Jasmine, alone, no distractions, no pressure from his father or the business. He needed to hear her words again, to feel her presence, to test the faith she had inspired in him. That night, in the shadow of the city, Sterling wheeled himself out of the mansion. The air was cool against his skin, and the streets felt distant and foreign, as though he were moving through a dream. The mansion, with its towering gates and manicured lawns, seemed like a world away. For the first time in a long while, Sterling felt like he was stepping outside of the life his father had created for him, away from the expectations, away from the pressure, away from the burden of being Maxwell Thorne's son. Jasmine was waiting for him at a small, secluded park near the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet spot, where the streetlights flickered softly and the noise of the world seemed distant. Sterling found her sitting on a bench, her small figure illuminated by the soft glow of the lamplight. Her presence was calm and unassuming, a stark contrast to the chaos that always seemed to surround him. She looked up as he approached, her green eyes locking onto his with the same unwavering confidence that had intrigued him from the moment they met. "You came," Jasmine said, her voice soft but strong. "I knew you would." Sterling hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. The words that had been bottled up inside him for so long now felt like they were ready to spill out. "I don't know if I can do this, Jasmine," he said quietly, his voice strained with the weight of his doubts. "I've spent my whole life trying to find a way to fix myself. I've tried everything. Nothing ever works. And now, you're asking me to believe that you can heal me. It feels impossible." Jasmine's eyes softened, and she stood up from the bench, moving toward him with a calmness that made him feel grounded. She placed a small hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture, but one that felt strangely comforting. "I know it's hard to believe," she said, her voice gentle. "But you've been carrying this weight for so long, Sterling. You've been fighting against yourself, against your body, against what you think you are, but you don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." Sterling looked down, his fingers trembling on the armrests of his wheelchair. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to let go of the fear that had controlled his life for so long. But there was a part of him that was terrified of what would happen if he did. What if this was another lie? What if Jasmine's promise ended just like all the others? "You don't understand," Sterling said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've been through this before. I've been told there's hope, that there's a cure, and I've trusted people who said they could fix me. But none of it worked. None of it." Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. "I know," she said softly. "But this isn't about fixing you, Sterling. This is about believing in something bigger than yourself. It's about trusting that you're not broken, that you're not beyond help. You have to believe, first, in yourself." Sterling's heart pounded in his chest as Jasmine's words sank in. It was as though she had reached into the deepest part of him, the part that had been locked away for years, and unlocked something he had almost forgotten existed. "Hope. I don't know if I can believe again," he whispered. "I've been hurt so many times. I've let myself believe, and it only ever ends in disappointment." Jasmine crouched down in front of him, her small face level with his. "Belief isn't about being perfect, Sterling. It's not about having all the answers or knowing exactly how things will turn out. Belief is about trusting that the impossible can happen. Even when everything tells you it can't, if you can just take that first step, I promise you, you'll see the miracle." For a moment, Sterling was silent. He felt the weight of his father's expectations, the pressure of the business deal, the fear of failure. And yet, somewhere beneath all of that, he felt something shift. He felt a small spark of something he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope, as fragile as it was. "You're asking me to trust you," Sterling said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm asking you to trust yourself," Jasmine replied, her voice steady. "And I'm asking you to trust that miracles aren't about grand gestures or instant fixes. They're about believing that change is possible, even in the smallest ways. You've already taken the hardest step by coming here. Now, all you have to do is let go of the fear and trust that I can help you. Sterling closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The night air was cool against his skin, and the soft rustle of the leaves in the trees above was the only sound that filled the silence between them. He had always been afraid to believe, afraid of what would happen if he let himself hope. But here, with Jasmine's steady presence and unwavering faith, he felt something shift inside him. He wasn't sure how or why, but he felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in so long: trust. "I'll try," Sterling said finally, his voice soft but resolute. "I'll trust you, Jasmine. I'll take that first step." Jasmine smiled, her green eyes glowing with a warmth that seemed to fill the space between them. "That's all I need, Sterling. You're not alone in this. I'm here with you." Sterling nodded, the weight on his chest lightening just a little. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't carrying the world on his shoulders alone. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The night passed quietly as Sterling and Jasmine sat together in the park, talking about everything and nothing at all. Sterling had always felt like he was an outsider in his own life, but with Jasmine, for the first time, he felt like he belonged. He wasn't just the son of Maxwell Thorne, the heir to a business empire. He was just Sterling, a person with hopes and dreams, a person who could still believe in something beyond the limitations of his body. And in that moment, Sterling knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be without doubt or fear. But he had taken the first step. And that, for now, was enough. The following days were filled with uncertainty, and though Sterling had taken that first step, the weight of his doubts threatened to pull him back into the familiar shadows of fear. He had trusted Jasmine. He had opened himself up to the possibility of something extraordinary. But each new day seemed to bring more pressure, more questions, more doubt. The 30-day deadline hung over him like a dark cloud, each tick of the clock reminding him that time was running out. Maxwell was relentless in his pursuit of the business deal, and the pressure only intensified as the deadline approached. Sterling could feel his father's gaze constantly on him, a reminder that the success of the company and their future depended on him playing a role. But every moment he spent with Jasmine, trying to believe in the impossible, felt like a contradiction to everything his father had taught him. Maxwell had always taught him that success was built on hard work, facts, and results, not on blind faith. The physical pain of his paralysis continued unabated, each day the same as the last. He could feel the numbness creeping up his limbs, the heaviness that anchored him to his chair, and despite his mind's efforts to push through the doubt, his body refused to respond. The miracle that Jasmine had promised seemed just out of reach, like a dream he couldn't quite grasp. Sterling tried to push those thoughts away. He had made a commitment, hadn't he? He had promised himself that he would trust Jasmine. But the closer the 30-day deadline came, the more the weight of his doubts pressed down on him. Every day that passed without any physical change, without any sign of improvement, made it harder to believe. He spent hours sitting in his room, staring at the walls, his mind filled with questions. What if this doesn't work? What if Jasmine is just another well-meaning person who doesn't know what she's talking about? What if nothing can ever change? The pressure from his father didn't help. Maxwell was becoming more agitated as the deal came closer to collapse, and his anxiety was bleeding into their interactions. He had started pushing Sterling harder, urging him to step up, to be a part of the deal, to be the son that the company needed him to be. And with each passing day, Sterling could feel the walls closing in, suffocating him under the weight of expectations and his own insecurities. "Sterling, we need you at that meeting tomorrow. This is our chance." "I need you to be there," Maxwell said one evening as they sat together in the study. Sterling could hear the tension in his father's voice. The pressure was mounting. Sterling nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. He could hear his father's words, but they felt like they were coming from a different world, one he didn't know how to navigate anymore. "I know, Dad," Sterling said quietly. "I'll be there." Maxwell didn't seem to notice the lack of enthusiasm in his son's voice. He was too consumed with his own worries to notice that Sterling was struggling in ways far deeper than the deal. He patted his son on the shoulder, the gesture well-meaning but hollow. "Good. I'm counting on you, son," Maxwell said before leaving the room, his footsteps heavy as he walked down the hall. Sterling sat in the silence that followed, the weight of his father's expectations crashing down on him. He didn't want to disappoint him again, but how could he be a part of something so big when he felt so small, so trapped? He couldn't move, couldn't even stand on his own. And yet, here he was, being asked to carry the world on his shoulders. The thoughts swirled in his head. How can I be the one to carry this weight? How can I help fix something when I can't even fix myself? That night, Sterling couldn't sleep. The darkness of his room felt oppressive, and the silence only made his doubts grow louder. He could feel the cold, hard truth creeping into his mind. He wasn't enough. He had tried for years to be something he wasn't, to live up to an ideal that was impossible for someone like him. The pain in his legs, the numbness, the heaviness, it was all part of him now. It was who he was, and no amount of hope or belief would change that. But then, in the quiet of the night, a soft knock at his door broke through his thoughts. Sterling glanced at the clock. It was late. Too late for anyone to be around. His heart skipped a beat as he wheeled himself toward the door. "Come in," he called softly. The door creaked open, and to Sterling's surprise, it was Jasmine standing there. She didn't look surprised to see him awake. In fact, she seemed calm and composed, as if she had expected to find him here. "I thought you might be up," she said softly, stepping into the room. "May I sit?" Sterling nodded, surprised at how easily she had slipped into his space, as though she belonged there. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice tight with emotion. About believing. About trusting. Jasmine sat down across from him, her small figure seeming almost fragile in the dim light. She looked at him with those steady green eyes, and for the first time, Sterling realized that there was something deeply unshakable about her. Something he couldn't quite explain, but felt in the depths of his heart. "I know it's hard," Jasmine said quietly. "You're fighting against yourself, Sterling. You've been told your whole life that you're broken, that this is your fate. But that's not true. You don't have to carry that burden anymore." Sterling stared at her, the words hanging in the air between them. "How do you know? How can you be so sure?" Jasmine's gaze softened, her expression full of compassion. "Because I see you, Sterling. I see you for who you really are, not what the world tells you you should be." Healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about seeing the truth of who you are, beyond the limitations. Sterling felt a lump form in his throat. He had never allowed himself to believe that someone, anyone, could see past his paralysis, past the endless failures that defined his life. But Jasmine seemed to see something different in him, something he couldn't quite grasp, but was starting to believe. "You have to let go of the fear, Sterling," she continued, her voice steady and sure. "The fear that tells you you're not enough, the fear that keeps you trapped. You've been living in that fear for so long, but you have to choose to step out of it." Sterling looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. "What if I fail again?" he whispered. Jasmine's voice was soft, but it held an unwavering strength. The miracle isn't about success or failure. It's about belief. It's about trusting in the possibility of something greater. You can't control everything, but you can choose to believe. And when you do, the world will open up in ways you can't even imagine. Sterling swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. It felt impossible, but at the same time, it felt like the only truth he had left. Could he really let go of the fear? Could he trust again? For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what the answer was. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't keep living in the shadows of doubt. He had to try. He had to believe. "I'll try," he said, his voice trembling with the weight of his decision. "I'll try to believe." Jasmine smiled gently, her eyes filled with warmth. "That's all I need, Sterling. That's all anyone needs. A little bit of belief." The next few days were a mixture of struggles and small victories. Sterling still felt the weight of his doubts, still felt the constant ache in his legs, but something was different. Every time he looked at Jasmine, every time she spoke to him, with that unwavering belief, the darkness of his doubts seemed a little less suffocating. The 30-day deadline loomed ever closer, but Sterling began to realize that this wasn't just about his paralysis. It was about his heart, his mind, and his willingness to let go of the fear that had ruled his life for so long. Every time he let himself believe, even for a moment, he felt a little more alive. And for the first time in years, Sterling began to feel like he might actually have the courage to trust. Not just Jasmine, but himself. The days continued to blur together, each one bringing Sterling closer to the 30-day deadline. The pressure from his father, Maxwell, intensified with every passing moment. Sterling could feel the weight of his father's expectations bearing down on him like a heavy storm cloud, suffocating him. And he knew that time was running out. The business deal that would decide their future hung in the balance. And yet, Sterling found himself lost in a different struggle. A struggle between what his father wanted from him and what he was trying to believe for himself. Despite his doubts, there was a small, flickering light within him, an ember of hope that Jasmine had kindled. It was fragile, yet it was there. And as each day passed, that light seemed to grow stronger, even if only by the smallest measure. Sterling could feel it within him, that change, the quiet shift from skepticism to curiosity, from fear to possibility. He had begun to hope, even if he was still too afraid to truly believe. Jasmine had been with him every step of the way. Her presence was constant, grounding, and comforting. She had never wavered in her belief that he could heal, that he could break free of the limitations that had held him captive for so long. And now, it seemed, she was about to push him even further. It was early one morning when Jasmine came to him with a quiet intensity in her eyes, a look that Sterling knew meant something important was about to happen. "Sterling," she said softly, "today is the day you're ready." Sterling looked at her, confused. "Ready? Ready for what?" Jasmine smiled, a small but knowing smile. "Ready to let go." Sterling's heart raced, his palms starting to sweat as doubt began to creep in again. "Let go? Let go of what?" "Let go of the fear, Sterling," Jasmine said gently, her voice unwavering. "Let go of the disbelief. Let go of the skepticism. Let go of the past. Today, I want you to come with me. I'm going to challenge you to confront your deepest fears, your deepest doubts. You've come this far, but you're still holding on to something that's keeping you from the healing you need. It's time to face it." Sterling's mind raced. The thought of confronting his fears head-on was overwhelming. For years, those fears had been his constant companions, pushing him to play it safe, to stay in his wheelchair, to accept that his life had already been written for him. But now, Jasmine was asking him to step outside of that, asking him to challenge everything he had believed about himself. And part of him wanted to say no, to walk away, to hide. But another part of him, the part that had been ignited by her faith in him, felt an undeniable pull to follow her, to take that first, terrifying step. "I'm not sure I can do this," Sterling admitted, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "I've been afraid for so long. I've been afraid to believe in anything because I'm afraid of failing again." Jasmine's expression softened, and she stepped closer to him, placing a hand gently on his arm. "That's exactly why you have to do this. You've been holding on to the fear of failure for so long that it's become part of you. But you can't heal if you're still afraid to try. The first step is to surrender, to trust. Even when the outcome is unknown." Sterling swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He had spent his entire life trying to control everything around him, trying to ensure that nothing, no one, could hurt him again, sir. The idea of surrendering, of letting go of that control, terrified him. But Jasmine's steady gaze and her calm confidence seemed to beckon him forward, as though she knew something he didn't. "I'm ready," Sterling said finally, his voice quiet but filled with determination. "I'm ready to try." Jasmine led Sterling to a park on the outskirts of the city, a quiet, secluded place where the trees provided a canopy of shade and the sounds of the city faded into the background. It was a peaceful spot, one where Sterling had never been before, and as he wheeled himself along the gravel path, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. "This is where we begin," Jasmine said, her voice soft, yet carrying the weight of something important. "We're going to meditate here. I want you to focus, Sterling. I want you to think about the possibility of healing, not just in your body, but in your heart. You've been carrying this weight for so long, but it's time to release it." Sterling looked at her, unsure of what she meant. Meditation was something he had never really practiced before. It felt strange to think about healing through something so intangible. But he trusted her, and so with hesitation, he followed her instructions. "Sit comfortably," Jasmine guided, helping him adjust his wheelchair so that he was facing the open space in front of them. "Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and focus. Think about your body. Think about the parts that feel heavy, the parts that feel trapped. Don't fight it. Just breathe into it." Sterling did as she instructed, taking a slow, deep breath. His chest rose and fell, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause around him. The sounds of the park, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, faded, and the only thing he could hear was his own breath. "Now," Jasmine continued, her voice calm and steady, "I want you to focus on your legs. Think about the pain, the numbness, the heaviness, but also think about the possibility of movement. Imagine that your legs are not confined by your fears, by your doubts. Imagine that they are free, that they can move. Picture it." Sterling clenched his fists, his mind flooded with conflicting emotions. How could he imagine his legs moving? They hadn't moved in years. They were paralyzed. The fear of failure gripped him once again, making it hard to focus. But he forced himself to breathe, to calm his racing thoughts. He imagined his legs, not as they were, but as they could be, free from the confines of paralysis. And in that brief moment, something inside him shifted. "I can't," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can't believe it." Jasmine was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with quiet strength. "That's the fear, Sterling. The fear of believing. The fear of trying and failing again, but it's that fear that keeps you trapped. You have to let it go. You have to believe in the possibility, even if you don't know how it will happen. Belief isn't about knowing the outcome. It's about trusting that you're worthy of it." Sterling's chest tightened as the weight of her words hit him. Could he really let go of the fear? Could he trust in something he couldn't see? Something he couldn't control? "Sterling," Jasmine said softly, "you've been carrying the weight of this for so long. It's time to surrender. You don't have to hold on to the fear anymore. Trust that the miracle is waiting for you." Sterling took a deep breath. His heart raced, his body tense, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself to let go. He stopped trying to control the outcome, stopped fighting against the fear. Instead, he surrendered to the possibility that something could change, even if he didn't understand how. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. No pain, no fear. Just a quiet stillness that seemed to fill the space between him and the world. And then, something happened. A small shift. A tiny tremor in his legs. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. Sterling's breath caught in his throat. His hands trembled as he touched his legs, unsure if he was imagining it. But when he felt the faintest hint of movement, a twitch, a stir, he couldn't help the surge of hope that flooded through him. "It's happening," he whispered, his voice full of awe. Jasmine smiled, her eyes filled with quiet joy. "Yes, Sterling, it's happening. You've taken the first step, and now the healing has begun." Sterling sat there, stunned, trying to wrap his mind around what had just happened. For years, he had lived in a world of numbness, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And yet, in this moment, something had shifted. The fear that had controlled him for so long felt a little less heavy, and a strange warmth, something he couldn't explain, was beginning to spread through him. Jasmine had said the healing would begin, but he hadn't fully believed it. Not until now. He looked at her, his heart racing, his mind trying to catch up with the miracle that was unfolding. "Is this real?" he asked, his voice trembling, still uncertain. Jasmine's gaze was steady, unwavering. "It's real, Sterling. You've already taken the hardest step. Now you just have to trust that the rest will follow." Sterling closed his eyes, breathing deeply. He felt something, a slight shift in his legs, a change in the usual numbness that had consumed him for years. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. A tingling sensation, faint but undeniable, was starting to spread through his legs. He held his breath as the feeling grew. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced before. Warmth, like the gentle brush of a hand against his skin, spreading slowly but surely. It was as though something deep within him was waking up, and the realization sent a shiver down his spine. "Jasmine," Sterling whispered, his voice shaky, I think I feel something." Her smile deepened, her eyes lighting up with quiet triumph. "You do. It's working, Sterling. The healing is real." Sterling's hands trembled as he reached down, his fingers brushing the surface of his legs. The familiar numbness that had been his constant companion was beginning to recede, replaced by the sensation of warmth and movement. He couldn't believe it. He had never imagined that something so simple, so pure, could bring him back to life in a way he had never thought possible. He closed his eyes again, focusing all of his attention on the feeling in his legs. His heart pounded in his chest as he concentrated, letting the sensation fill him. Slowly, very slowly, the warmth spread from his thighs to his calves. And then, without warning, he felt it. A twitch. A small, involuntary movement. He gasped, his hands going to his legs as he felt the tremor, the faint but unmistakable stirrings of life. It was as though his legs had woken up from a long, deep slumber. His hands shook as he touched the spot where he had felt the movement. Disbelief and wonder flooding his mind. "It's happening," he whispered again, more to himself than to Jasmine. His voice was full of awe, his heart pounding in his chest. Could this be real? Could it really be happening? Jasmine nodded, her smile never wavering. "Yes, Sterling. The first step is always the hardest. But now, you've opened yourself to the possibility of change, and that's when miracles happen." Sterling's fingers dug into his legs, feeling the subtle tremor, the warmth, the stirring of life in places that had been frozen for years. His legs, once lifeless, seemed to be responding, twitching, shifting, and awakening. He couldn't believe what he was feeling. The numbness had always been there, the constant companion of his paralysis, and now it was fading, replaced by something new, something he could never have imagined. "I can feel it," he said, his voice a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "I can feel my legs moving." Jasmine placed a hand gently on his shoulder, offering him quiet encouragement. "You've been waiting for this moment for so long, Sterling. Now, let go of the doubt. Trust in the process. This is just the beginning." Sterling's breath caught in his throat as he focused on the sensation in his legs. The warmth continued to spread, inching its way down to his feet. He felt a deep, tingling pressure building, as if his legs were slowly coming back to life. The fear, the doubt, the skepticism, all of it seemed to fade away as the movement grew stronger, more pronounced. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't dared to hope for. The possibility of movement, of freedom. He looked up at Jasmine, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's working. It's really working." Jasmine's smile softened, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "It's all you, Sterling. You've been carrying this weight for so long. But now, you've taken the first step, and the rest is up to you." Sterling took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The sensation in his legs was still faint, still fragile, but it was real. It was happening. His mind was spinning with disbelief and hope, with the terrifying thought that this could be the beginning of something he had longed for, but never truly believed was possible. His legs twitched again, this time with a little more force, a little more life. Sterling couldn't help but let out a breathless laugh, a sound of pure joy and amazement. It's really happening," he repeated, unable to stop himself. His hands moved from his legs to his face, as though he needed to make sure he wasn't dreaming. Jasmine watched him quietly, her heart swelling with pride. "This is just the beginning, Sterling." The healing is happening on the inside too. You've let go of the fear, and now the physical healing will follow. You just have to trust. Sterling nodded, his mind still reeling from the sensation. His legs were no longer just a part of him that he had resigned himself to. They were something new, something alive. It wasn't the full movement he had hoped for, but it was enough. It was a spark, a flicker of something that had been dormant for years, and now it was stirring, awakening, coming to life. This is incredible," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. He wiped at his eyes, the tears coming unbidden as the weight of the moment settled on him. He had waited so long for this, had fought so hard to believe that he could be free of the limitations that had kept him confined for so many years. And now, here he was, feeling the impossible come to life in his body. Jasmine's voice was soft but firm. "Don't stop believing, Sterling. You've already come this far. Now you have to trust that it will continue." Sterling took another deep breath, looking down at his legs with renewed determination. The healing had begun, but it was only the beginning. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Sterling felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't just waiting for a miracle to happen. He was part of the miracle. The hours passed, and Sterling continued to focus on the sensation in his legs. He still couldn't move them fully, but he could feel the warmth, the tingling, the subtle movements that signaled something was changing. For the first time, he didn't feel powerless. He felt like he had a choice, like he could take control of his destiny. He could choose to believe. Jasmine stayed with him, guiding him through the process, offering words of encouragement and quiet support. She had always believed in him, and now Sterling was beginning to believe in himself. The fear that had once gripped him so tightly was loosening its hold, and with each passing moment, he felt more alive, more connected to the possibility of change. As the evening wore on and the stars began to twinkle above them, Sterling allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. His body, once so still, was now responding to the energy of his belief. The healing had begun, not just in his legs, but in his heart. "I can feel it," he whispered again, a smile spreading across his face. "I can feel it." Jasmine smiled, her eyes glistening with pride. "You always could, Sterling. You just had to believe." And for the first time in years, Sterling felt the full force of what Jasmine had been telling him all along. Healing wasn't just about physical movement. It was about belief. It was about trusting the process, trusting that change was possible, even when it seemed impossible. And as the night deepened, Sterling knew that the miracle was unfolding, not just in his body, but in his soul. It was early the next morning when Sterling woke up, his body still tingling with the after effects of the evening before. The warmth, the stirring, the tiny movements in his legs, all of it lingered in his mind like a dream he didn't want to wake from. But now, with the light of day shining through his bedroom window, the reality of what had happened the night before began to settle in. He could still feel it, the sensation that had slowly begun to awaken within him. His legs, once completely unresponsive, were now alive in ways he never thought possible. The fear, the doubt, the skepticism that had consumed him for so long had started to fade, replaced by something new. Hope. A quiet, steady hope that was growing inside him with every passing minute. Sterling sat on the edge of his bed, feeling the weight of his legs, the familiar heaviness that had always been there. But this time, it was different. The pain wasn't the same. It was muted, softened, as if the nerves in his legs were slowly starting to reconnect, slowly starting to work together in a way they hadn't in years. And he could feel it. He could feel the changes deep within his muscles, his joints, his very bones. With a deep breath, Sterling placed his hands on his legs, willing them to move, willing them to take that first step, both literally and metaphorically. His heart raced in his chest as he focused all his energy on the feeling in his legs, the warmth, the tingling, the stirring. It was all still there. And as he concentrated, something unexpected happened. He felt a twitch, a slight shift in his legs that sent a ripple of shock through his body. For a moment, he froze. Had it been real? Had he imagined it? But as the seconds passed, the feeling in his legs grew stronger, more distinct. The twitch turned into a slight movement, followed by another. It was slow, hesitant, but it was happening. Sterling's breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth. He was moving. His legs, which had been completely paralyzed, were moving. It wasn't a full step. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment. But it was a movement, a shift, a glimmer of something real, something that Sterling hadn't felt in years. His hands trembled as he touched his legs, still in disbelief. Was this the beginning of something bigger? Could it be possible? Could he really walk again? Sterling? A soft voice broke through his thoughts. He looked up to see Jasmine standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with quiet anticipation. I felt it, Sterling whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I felt it. I moved. Just a little. But I moved. Jasmine's face lit up with a smile that seemed to brighten the whole room. I told you, Sterling, the healing has begun. Now, you just have to keep believing. Sterling's heart raced. But this is real, right? This isn't just me imagining it? Jasmine stepped into the room, sitting down next to him on the bed. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and comforting. It's real, Sterling. This is the moment you've been waiting for. It's happening. Sterling closed his eyes, trying to steady his racing thoughts. This wasn't just a physical miracle. It was emotional, spiritual, and transformative. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just fighting his body. He was fighting for his future, for the person he could become, and for the belief that he was worthy of this change. I don't know what to do next, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to move forward from here. Jasmine smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. You keep moving forward, Sterling. You keep believing, one step at a time. The next few days passed in a blur. Sterling continued to experience small incremental movements in his legs, twitches, shifts, and tiny motions that, while subtle, were undeniable. Every time he focused, he could feel the changes, the growth. The healing wasn't immediate, but it was real. He had taken the first step, and that was enough to ignite something within him that he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Jasmine was with him every step of the way, guiding him through each small victory. She reminded him that healing wasn't just about the physical body. It was about healing the mind, the heart, and the spirit. And Sterling could feel it all coming together. He wasn't just regaining the use of his legs. He was regaining his sense of self, his belief in his own strength, and his ability to change. But as Sterling's physical transformation began to take root, so too did the transformation within his family, and particularly with his father. Maxwell had watched from the sidelines, still uncertain of Jasmine's powers, still skeptical of the claim that his son could be healed by a little girl who had no training, no credentials, and no explanation for how it was happening. But Sterling's progress was undeniable. It was becoming harder and harder for Maxwell to ignore the changes in his son. One afternoon, as Sterling sat in the living room focusing on his legs, Maxwell entered the room, his face unreadable. He had been a constant presence in Sterling's life, but always as a shadow of expectation, pushing, demanding, never truly seeing his son for who he was. But now, something had shifted. Maxwell watched Sterling for a moment, his gaze lingering on his son's legs as they moved ever so slightly. You're really doing it, aren't you?" he said, his voice quiet, almost incredulous. Sterling looked up at his father, his heart pounding. "Yes, I think I am. It's happening, Dad." Maxwell took a step closer, his hands clasped in front of him. "I don't understand it, Sterling. I don't understand how this is happening. But I can see it. I can see you changing." Sterling swallowed hard, the weight of his father's words sinking in. "I know it's hard to believe, but it's real. I don't know how to explain it, but it's real." Maxwell looked down, as though struggling with some internal conflict. For a long moment, he was silent, his brow furrowed in thought. Then, finally, he spoke. "I've pushed you, Sterling. Pushed you to be more, to do more. I thought that, if I pushed hard enough, I could fix what's broken. But I've realized that I can't fix you. I can't fix what's inside you. That's something you have to do yourself." Sterling's heart clenched. Was his father really saying this? After all these years of pressure, of demands, of trying to force him into a mold he wasn't meant to fit, was Maxwell finally acknowledging the truth? Maxwell met his son's eyes, his voice softening. "I see now that the real healing isn't just about your legs. It's about you finding the strength to believe in yourself. And I've been blind to that." Sterling felt a lump form in his throat. "Dad, I've always wanted to make you proud, but I've always felt like I wasn't enough." Maxwell nodded slowly. "I know, son. I know." He paused, looking at Sterling with a new kind of understanding. You've always been enough." "I just couldn't see it." Sterling's breath caught in his throat. Was this really happening? Was this the moment his father was truly seeing him for the first time? Maxwell took a deep breath, his eyes filled with emotion. "Sterling, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the man you've become, and I want to be a part of this. I want to be part of the healing, not just for you, but for me, too." Sterling couldn't believe what he was hearing. His father had always been distant, always expecting more, always pushing. But now, he was here, present, acknowledging his son's transformation in a way that Sterling had never expected. "Dad," Sterling said, his voice trembling, "do you mean that?" Maxwell nodded, his eyes filled with pride. "Yes, Sterling, I do, and I want to help you. Help us. I'm ready to sign the deal." Sterling blinked, unsure if he had heard him correctly. "The deal?" Maxwell's gaze softened. "It's not just about the company anymore, son. It's about you. It's about us. I see now that the business doesn't matter if we're not together. So I'm signing the deal because you're worth it. You've always been worth it." The weight that had been pressing on Sterling's chest for years began to lift. His father's approval, once a distant dream, was now a living, breathing reality. And with that approval came the healing, not just of his body, but of his relationship with his father. And as the deal was signed, Sterling knew that the miracle wasn't just in his legs, it was in his heart, his family, and the belief that had been reborn within him. The days that followed the signing of the deal were like a new beginning for Sterling, not just in terms of his body, which had started to respond in ways he had never imagined possible, but in the very core of who he was, his relationship with his father, the company, and most importantly, himself. The weight that had hung over him for so long, the constant pressure to perform, to be more than what he felt capable of, began to lift, replaced by a quiet peace that Sterling had never known. Maxwell, for the first time, saw his son not as a means to an end, not as the heir to his empire or the one who was supposed to carry on the family name, but as a person worthy of love, care, and respect. The transformation was evident in every interaction they had. They no longer spoke only in terms of business, of deals and profits. Instead, their conversations became more about life, the future, the healing. The relationship they were finally building from a place of understanding rather than obligation. One evening, Sterling found himself sitting in the living room with his father, both of them sharing a rare, quiet moment. Maxwell, who had once been all business, now seemed different. His eyes were softer, his voice steadier, and he was no longer focused solely on the next big deal or the pressure of the empire. "Sterling," Maxwell said, his voice low and thoughtful, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. About you. About us." Sterling looked at his father, his heart filled with a strange mix of gratitude and wonder. "What do you mean?" Maxwell leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair as though searching for the right words. "All these years, I've been pushing you to be something I wanted. I wanted you to be strong, to carry the business, to be the heir to everything I built. But I never stopped to think about what you really needed, what you really wanted. Sterling felt a lump form in his throat. His father had always been the driving force in his life, demanding, relentless, and always striving for success. But now, there was a vulnerability in his voice that made Sterling realize just how far they had come. "I didn't need you to push me, Dad," Sterling said softly. "I needed you to see me, to see who I really am, not just as your son or the next in line, but as me, just Sterling." Maxwell nodded slowly, his eyes full of emotion. "I see you now, Sterling. I see you, and I'm sorry. I've been blind to everything that really matters." His voice faltered for a moment before he added, "I've been so focused on what I wanted, I didn't see how much I was hurting you in the process." Sterling's heart swelled with something he hadn't expected. An overwhelming sense of connection, of healing. For years, he had longed for his father's approval, his father's love. And now, in this moment, it felt like both were finally being given, not as a demand, but as a gift. "I'm not perfect," Maxwell continued, his voice softer now. "But I want to try, Sterling. I want to be a better father, a better man, for you." Sterling felt the weight of his father's words, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the love and connection that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. "I want that too, Dad." The air between them felt different now. Lighter, filled with something that hadn't existed before. There was still work to be done, but for the first time, they were walking this path together, not as business partners or father and son in name only, but as two people who were truly beginning to understand each other. Meanwhile, Jasmine's life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Despite the miraculous changes she had sparked in Sterling's life, she remained as humble and grounded as ever. Her heart was still with the people who needed her. And though she had helped to heal Sterling's body, her own life still lacked the comfort and stability that others took for granted. Jasmine, now a quiet symbol of hope, still roamed the streets where she had spent so many nights, seeking food and shelter. But as Sterling's health continued to improve, and Maxwell's perspective on life shifted, both father and son knew they could not let her continue to live the way she had. "Dad," Sterling said one evening, as they were sitting together in the study, "there's someone who helped me more than anyone could imagine. She believed in me when no one else did. Her name is Jasmine." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Jasmine? The little girl who healed you?" Sterling nodded, his heart full of gratitude. "Yes, she has no family, no home. She's still out there, on the streets, despite everything she's done for me. I can't just sit back and let her live like that." Maxwell was silent for a moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the edge of the desk. "I've been thinking about her, too," he said finally. "She's not just some random child. She's a force of nature. And what she did for you, it's not something I can easily forget." Sterling looked at his father, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Dad, I want to offer her a chance at a new life. A real chance. She deserves so much more than what she's been given." Maxwell's gaze softened, and for the first time in years, Sterling saw the compassion that had always been buried beneath the layers of business and success. "You're right, son. She deserves a future. And it's time we did something about it." A few days later, Maxwell and Sterling set out to find Jasmine. It didn't take long. She was still living in the same area she always had, walking the streets with a quiet resilience that seemed to match the glow in her eyes. When they found her, Jasmine was sitting on a park bench, looking out at the sunset, her expression serene. She didn't notice them at first, but when Sterling called her name, she turned slowly, a gentle smile spreading across her face. "Sterling," she said, her voice warm but filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here with my dad," Sterling said, gesturing toward Maxwell, who stood a few feet away. "We came to talk to you." Jasmine's eyes shifted from Sterling to Maxwell, and for a moment, she seemed to recognize something deeper in his gaze. "I didn't expect you to be here," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Maxwell stepped forward, his expression solemn but kind. "Jasmine, we've been thinking about you, about everything you've done for Sterling, and everything you've given. We can't just let you continue to live like this." Jasmine looked down at her hands, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she said softly. "Don't need much. I've learned to live without things." "But you shouldn't have to," Maxwell said firmly. "You've changed our lives in ways we can't even begin to explain. It's time we did something for you." Jasmine blinked, clearly taken aback by his words. "What do you mean?" Sterling stepped forward, his heart in his throat. "We want to offer you a new life, Jasmine. A real home. You don't have to be out here anymore. You've done so much for us. It's time we return the favor." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then, finally, she nodded. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Sterling said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "Just say you'll come with us. We want to help." Maxwell placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "You've shown us what true belief looks like. Now, it's time we believe in you." As Jasmine stood there, her heart full, she looked up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to twinkle, each one a promise of something bigger, something brighter. She had come from nothing, an abandoned child with no family, no home, but now she stood here, surrounded by people who saw her, who believed in her, and who were ready to give her a chance at a life she had never imagined. "Sometimes the biggest miracles happen when you least expect them," Jasmine whispered to herself, a smile curling on her lips. And as the story closed, Sterling, Maxwell, and Jasmine stood together, each one forever changed by the belief that had transformed their lives. For Jasmine, the final miracle wasn't just the healing of Sterling's body. It was the awakening of her own heart, the discovery that sometimes the biggest miracles aren't the ones we receive, but the ones we inspire in others.